Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with episode 2 of the LAS podcast, and today we're joined by MNG Rose Brady, and of course, I have my lovely co-host KTL.
How are you doing? Thank you for having me on again. Brady, how are you doing? Welcome on to the show.
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, Brady, I have questions, obviously. I kind of help run MMG, so
I
I,
didn't know.
obviously you're part of my org, and you decided to switch when Anguish decided to FF the rest of their games for the season. They didn't really have the cohesion, whatever the reason was, to then go to Rose. Can you talk to me about what was the transition like going from like a struggling Anguish team to like Rose was like one of the top three teams in tier two?
Honestly, the transition was pretty easy. I was already like pretty familiar with a lot of the Rose members,
Mhm.
playing games with them and stuff. So it wasn't hard at all.
Yeah.
Uh,
Have you had
yeah.
any like have you seen any obviously differences you're gonna see when you're having like when you're seeing a struggling team moving to like a successful team? Has there anything been like different as far of team cohesion or like just the champs you play or just different things that might be different than how you were when you were in Anguish?
Yeah. Have been really able to like open my champion pool to
Mhm.
like many different champions. Uh, being able to play around like an amazing jungler.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Um,
I definitely think
yeah.
when you're in a winning situation, you don't have to be relied upon to be like this huge 1v9 threat, which is something we always saw you guys. I mean, me and Shrub both we'll go into the power rankings and play rankings later, but we always thought of you really highly as a mid laner, even though you were on a bad team. And a lot of people, especially, gave me a lot of flack about that when I did my previous rankings because it's like, oh, well, this guy's on the last place team. How can he be good? It's like, well, maybe it's not him, you know? So yeah, I'm really curious now. So we just had the comp ruling about RAR. So tell me your expectations about Conquerors. Now we're heading into or Heat Six. So obviously our standings are a little bit different than they were thanks to the comp ruling and also just with the way the results have gone in Week Five. What are your thoughts about your division right now and where you think it's gonna play out?
I think the way the standings are right now are probably the way it ends.
Hmm.
I can't really see too much of a difference. There's a clear like top three, top four.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
it definitely felt that way last week as well. It seems to be like there's a very clear top four in tier two, and then outside of that, we're gonna have to see who can compete in the gauntlet for that fourth spot. I mean, we do luckily have for tier two the grand showdown is 6 teams, so all 6 teams technically already qualify because there's only 6 teams left for showdown. But the seeding will matter for that showdown immensely. Are you looking forward to potentially having like a tiebreaker, um, or anything like that, or any team you're really looking forward to playing potentially in playoffs?
Um, yeah, like well, I'd like to play Hydra again so I could actually beat them for once.
Okay.
Being 0-2 against them is not a fun thing to have on my name.
Hmm.
And obviously playing Mint again because they're a really good team and yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think Rose has struggled pretty heavily against Mint. But I think 1 week you were there, then 1 week you weren't. But I'm really curious to see if playoffs change anything because I think in every division we've had like the clear cut of like this team beats this team beats this team will lose to this team every time. So I'm really curious going into the last week and into playoffs, what will be the outlier? What's going to change? Will it be the exact same in every division like we think it's going to play out, or will there be that outlier? Which transmissions me actually to Stro because we happen to play against each other this week, and I'm pretty curious to see your thoughts going into the last week. Obviously, I'm pretty sure you're guaranteed second place right now. So what are
Yeah,
your
we are.
thoughts going into the last week and heading into playoffs for Legends?
Um, I would probably say for Legends, it's kind of, you know, obviously you guys get the benefit of playing as the 4 seed.
Yeah.
So we're kind of we know who like stylistically we'd rather play against.
Yeah.
So we just gotta kind of root for those teams. But I do believe I just let me check the schedule real quick. I think OO plays against you and then against Reaper. So I mean, I think the OO versus Reaper game is going to be actually really massive this weekend.
Yeah, Reaper
It,
has two really big games this week. Actually, they
yes, they.
play Cat Cowboys to kind of control their own destiny for fourth spot. If Cat Cowboys especially wins, I feel like they have a really easy way into top four because Cat Cowboys already beat Reaper in the past, and then they play B Team the following game at 9:30. So I definitely feel like Cat Cowboys can be that team that like no one was kind of talking about, and all of a sudden they end up being four. So really, really curious to see how Cat Cowboys does. They're a team that I get along with very well. So, and I'm also really curious to see how if Obo finishes third, how that matchup will be with you guys because I know you guys kind of went one and one against them, obviously this season. So it was one of your only losses in the season. So I'm super curious to see how that BO3 turns out. And then turning over to the division that's actually already done heading into playoffs is Masters division, which they always tell us we don't give them enough credit. So I'll bring up Apple Bottom Boys. They did finish number one. We had a lot of questions about them going into the last week of the season for them, which was last week in Heat 5. They played really well. They got two pretty decisive wins, especially the game against Espionage that we all had circled in our calendar as the game to watch. They played well. They won. Very clean game. They finished one. Espionage finished two because of tiebreaker over Direwolves. They were able to get that tiebreaker win. And then BPG Sapphire actually beat Super Friends in a tiebreaker, which was pretty surprising in my eyes because I had Super Friends in our last power rankings. I mean, we both did super high
Yeah,
up
we both did.
because they were able to beat a lot of the good teams in Masters. So I'm curious for like what is your thought going into playoffs for these one versus four and two versus three matches? Do you see any potential upsets?
Um, my only thing is I think ABB these last few weeks have had this very consistent roster.
Yeah.
They had this these same five guys 2 weeks in a row, I believe. I might be a little bit wrong,
Hmm.
but I know that they did make some roster changes. I know that YouTube is no longer playing mid.
Interesting.
Kaler, who was their jungler, is now going back mid. Rav is going back into the jungle. Everyone knows Rav
Yep.
in the LAS. Um, I'm not saying that it's going to make them worse. I just don't know how much their playstyle changes due to that. Um, so I think that's like the series to watch. I still favor ABB
Hmm.
even with the roster changes. And then I think the two versus three, I think that's gonna be. I think it's another close series. Probably that's a 2-1 for sure. It's kind of hard to pick which side though.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think Apple Bottom Boys, even with the roster change, I think YouTube's been doing actually a really good job in the mid lane. But I do think
Yeah,
Kaler is also a good player in his own right. I mean, obviously Bubble Lift's been having a very good season and the AD carry role this season, um, being a little bit more consistent than he has been in the past. So it's always good to see. And then for that Espionage Direwolves series that we talked about, I mean, Direwolves did change the roster quite a bit going into the last week here, and before we had roster lock. So it's curious to see the well-oiled machine that is Espionage, how they play. I mean, they did beat them already in the tiebreaker series or in the tiebreaker game. Dylas had a couple subs for that as well because it was the day after. So I'm pretty curious to see what happens. I would favor Espionage right now, personally, but I expect to see the carries from Dylos who are still there to continue to show up. So yeah,
And I agree.
yeah, I would agree. And then I'm really curious for. I think Conquerors is honestly going to be, especially with the removal of RAR, it really opens up the possibility for a team like Deep Below. Was previously rated pretty high on a lot of people's boards. Now they feel like before going into this week they were kind of floundering, but they had some pretty big wins going into this last heat. So I'm really curious if they're going to be able to, if the standings finish the way they are right now, where I mean it feels pretty safe unless Deep Below can force a tiebreaker against Moon. That feels like the only real change up in the standings.
I
That go
I
ahead.
know I know one of the big games that I'm looking forward to is just right off the bat. You got Rose versus Moon.
Yeah.
I think that's probably my biggest one to watch out. I do think Rose has the edge in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, but if they don't, then I mean they're basically what it seems like. They're like regardless of how they like if they win game one or if they lose it, they're tiebreaker. Um, which obviously Brady, you guys are kind of I don't know if you guys are preparing for a tiebreaker, but it seems as if If everything goes the way it should, you're gonna get a tiebreaker. How's that feel?
Um, Exciting to play more games. I, I think we'll win whatever. I'm pretty confident in myself and my team, so I don't really care about like who we're playing or
Mhm.
anything like that.
Yeah, it is worth noting that Rose beat Moon. It's actually really interesting dynamic in Conquerors because Mint's only losses have been to Moon. So Mint probably wants to avoid Moon in playoffs.
Yeah.
So, but then you have Deep Below who they've been able to beat. They've been able to beat Rose, and then Rose has been able to beat Moon, and then so has Deep Below. So it's a very interesting dynamic there in that Conquerors division. So I'm really curious to see, like you said, with the slated game of Rose versus Moon to start us out. If Moon wins, I know they guarantee a tiebreaker. I think Rose has to win both and Mint has to lose one to be able to force or to guarantee first spot, but I think Mint has already has guaranteed over Rose because they're 2-0 on them. So they have head to head. So really curious. I think now what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn over to the power rankings that we do. We'll go over the current standings that we've been talking about with you guys, and then we'll go over our personal power rankings for our teams, and then even for players this week because we don't really have obviously the huge upscale key. So the first one you'll see here is we do have the Masters division. As we said before, Masters finished off with Apple Bottom Boys being in first place at 8-2. Then you have Espionage winning the tiebreaker over Direwolves, and then BPG Sapphire winning that tiebreaker over Super Friends to get them into the playoff and not in the gauntlet. Yeah, I'm curious now, so I'll bring up some of the power rankings that we have here. So this is Stroh's power rankings for Tier 1 as a whole. So I'm curious as to what made you change your power ranking, Stroh? What made you want to keep people the same? Give me your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I think this week, I think the teams that I had in my power rankings, obviously we can see that the biggest dropper is Super Friends. I was very, very high on them,
Yeah.
and they they had a bit of a rough week, and they lost a tiebreaker, so it knocked them out. Um, and then another big change, obviously outside of the division, was the Warriors move up. But I feel like for just the Masters division as a whole, I think everything kind of slated the way I thought it would.
Mhm.
Everyone stayed the way they were. Super Friends kind of struggled to get across the finish line. That's all. That's what that was.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Legends standings now. But I would definitely agree. I think that Masters kind of ended. I guess it would be somewhat what I thought. I thought that Espionage would maybe be able to beat Apple Bottom Boys and force a tiebreaker. It didn't end up happening. But going into our legends here, obviously I think you kept everything pretty much the same when it comes to legends. So go ahead and tell me what you thought after Heat 4 there for the legends division.
I think that Warriors actually made the roster change that I thought was by far their best roster. Um, Colin went back top, Kiru went back mid, and they brought back in Super Bros. I think that was huge for them. Kakalin on support, I think he did really well support, but he just the pressure and what he does in the top lane against some of the people that he's already played against, really like that team just gelled a lot better. They had a 2-1 week,
Hmm.
so that was kind of crazy. They just jumped out and kind of took it. So I do think that they do kind of jump up, and I think that I think based on their schedule, let me take a peek. I think that they're shooting for that 5 seed,
Yeah.
and possibly if they can sneak in, if they get the proper who rises who falls. They're against B team, and
Then they have a
they get a
bye.
bye week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean they take the win, and you hope that Reaper and Cat Cowboys lose too, and you get into hopefully a good tiebreaker scenario. But I don't really know.
Yeah, it's curious because I think they can force a tiebreaker for 4 if Reaper ends up losing both of their games, which I think is entirely possible. I mean, they're playing against Cowboys and they're playing against OO, two very good, respectable teams.
Yeah.
That then they're sitting at the same record as the Verge Warriors, and Verge Warriors beat Reaper in a matchup actually last week. So you would have to favor Warriors going into tiebreaker situation. So I'm pretty curious there. I think it's a really big week for Reaper. We're gonna learn a lot about Reaper as an org and as a team going into this last set of games. It's a lot of pressure on them. If they control their own destiny in their own right, but they need to obviously take care of business. If not, then they're going to have to deal with Verge, I would assume, because what also is a matchup we haven't really talked about is that Verge plays B team. Obviously, that's a big game for B team as well because B team has 2 games that they play. They can be spoiler for a team like the Cat Cowboys that are trying to be that 4 spot. They play Verge and then they play Cat Cowboys. If they're able to get those 2 wins, they also are sitting at 4 wins and potentially can set up for that 5 spot. So I think it's a really big week for some of these bottom teams that we have in the Legends division to kind of show what power level we're going to be at going into playoffs and into Gauntlet, because obviously the difference in playing 1 or 2 best of ones compared to 3 or 4 is a big difference when you're going into Gauntlet and playing 4 different teams compared to just one of the
Yeah.
two. So, and it means a lot. Obviously, it's your ticket to Grand Tournament. So I definitely would agree. I'm gonna go ahead and move it to my tier 1 rankings. Obviously, I had Empire at number 2, but after losing to I think what was Verge,
Yeah, it was Warriors.
I decided to put Apple Bottom Boys at the 2 position here because I just think that they had a really good week, impressed me a lot against Espionage. I think they had a pretty good week in general. And then the other big surprise for me was BPG Sapphire. I moved them up 2 spots over where Super Friends was because of their win against Super Friends and even forcing that tiebreaker to begin with. So we have tier 2 here. We have Brady here to talk about Conqueror's division. Obviously, we talked about it a little bit. Brady, is do you expect who do you expect to be that 5th spot? Obviously, we have where both teams are going to make it to the grand showdown regardless because it is a top 6. But if you had to give a guess as to who finishes as that number 5 seed for Conquerors, who would you give it to?
Hydra. I think New Origins only has one actual win.
Yeah, I think so
Um,
too.
Hydra has, well, they beat us twice, so they at least have two.
Hmm.
So, um, pretty sure they have the three. So, um, I think they also have like, in general, just better players.
Hmm.
Although sometimes they're apparently a little coin flip or something, looking at like other games.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
definitely
so I
would
I do
agree.
expect them to be fifth.
Yeah, and it's actually a pretty interesting game. Again, another game starting at 8:30. New Origins plays against Hydra at right at 8:30 for that 5 spot. And obviously, it doesn't mean you make playoffs, but it does mean you can change who you play. I mean, I personally would rather want to play against the 3 seed than I mean against the 4 seed than the 3 seed when you're talking about the grand showdown, because 1 and 2s will get what the number 1 and 2 seed will get a bye in the first round. So 3 is playing 4 and 5 is playing. I'm sorry, 3 is playing 6 and 4 is playing 5. So I personally, if it was me, I would never be number 5 so I can play against the 4th best team, not the 3rd. So, and I feel like even though we're talking about these 4 teams in Conquerors, I do think there's a pretty big gap between top 3 and everyone else. So I definitely will be looking forward to that match to see how it impacts everything. But I'm gonna go. Do you have any surprising like takes on teams that you would expect to do well in playoffs?
Honestly, no, I don't. Unless you surprise hot take would be me predicting Rose winning it all. But other than that, no.
Yeah, I
I
like
don't think like New Origins are I just gonna like take games or take the series off of the top team. Maybe Deep Below might get upset, but that's about it.
Yeah, I would agree. It is gonna be pretty interesting because, like we said, that 4 versus 5 and 3 versus 6, it could mean Deep Below losing to a team like Hydra or like New Origins, which I definitely think is something that can happen. They've lost them in the past, at least to Hydra. So it is a rather predictable, but I don't want to call it stale, but it is a little predictable as to what the power rankings are going to be for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and put Stro's power rankings up here now. Stro, obviously, our power rankings are going to be pretty similar here as to what we're thinking for these teams. Do you have any surprise picks or surprise takes for any of these teams?
Um, honestly, I think it comes down to which of these top three teams really is gonna like. Obviously, top two get this bye week, so whichever one of those top three teams can just get out of this limbo. So obviously, I think the Rose versus Moon is a big matchup.
Hmm.
But outside of that, I think it's pretty, like you said, it's kind of like a very like stale. Like, we kind of know what to expect. I feel like this division has kind of had this like we know who's going to win in matchups,
Hmm.
and you'll see like Deep Below did beat Moon, and that's like the only upset that I've like really seen. So other than that, I mean, I don't have any really bold takes, unfortunately.
Were you surprised at all that because I know we both rated Rose higher than Mint. Obviously, that's why they went up 2 spots because they were below Moon and Rose last week. Were you surprised that they were able to take down these teams at all?
um, I definitely feel like Mint is they play well. Like you said, there's like this weird like triangle of like who beats who for the
Hmm.
top three, and it's gonna like realistically it comes down to which team is going to break the past. And I just think that Mint on paper just looks the most consistent, and they're just consistently the strongest.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I'm gonna go ahead and put my predictions up or my rankings. I think mine was a little bit different because I think the value of a team like Moon to actually beat Mint, whereas Rose hasn't been able to, is why I put them a little bit higher than Rose right now. Obviously, hopefully it fuels fire to the Rose players when they see this
Yeah.
that I rate Moon a little higher, but personally, I just think if Mint's the best team and Moon is able to beat them twice, then they should get credit for it, which is why I gave them the number 2 spot. And then I think the only one you'll notice differently is that I put New Origins above Hydra, which is a little bit different than you guys. Um, I think they have the ability to beat Hydra. I think Hydra is really dependent on 1 or 2 star players to play really well, and if they're not, then which I think is a very easy way to beat a team because you can shut down good players. So I do think that's why I have them at number 5. So here we have Stroh's player rankings for Division One, or I'm sorry, for Tier One and for Tier Two, obviously all together. We have Tier One. I think it's fair to put everyone together because I just think even though we might not be playing everyone, I think we can get a relative idea of the players' power level compared to other players in either their own division or the other division. So go ahead and tell me what were your thoughts, Stro, getting into this player rankings here. We can start. We can go roll by roll. We can go roll by roll, or just like what do you want to go with it first?
Um, I am actually gonna. I'll just go across the board for T2.
Okay.
Um, so basically, I I kind of obviously I can't watch all of the games. I haven't been able to see the stream games, but when I do see the stream games, I feel like some of the good players. Obviously, I think I talked really highly about Brady last week. Um, I know I think I said something about Big Fisher and Peakley in the past. So obviously those are like some big highlights I want to go upon.
Hmm.
And then from there, I mean, like in the top lane, like once again, you're gonna see like this very like top three heavy teams kind of
Yeah.
there, kind of leading the way, and you kind of can see that there. Um, I think it's pretty similar to your guys's, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure most of us have, I wouldn't say like identical, but very close. I would say the one thing the
I would agree. I definitely think AD for me personally, I know was the hardest role because again, half these teams are in my org, so I know them pretty well, and I see them play pretty often. I do VOD reviews, especially for Rose, pretty often, so I know how they play. So I'm obviously to be partial, but I'm also going to be, I guess, have more tough love for the players that I watch the most. So when it comes to tier two, so I definitely would agree. Tell me about your tier one standings. What made you go through this list here? What are your highlights for it?
Yeah, so I think obviously I think the number one highlight obviously for you is the fact that your entire team is number one across the board. Um, and I feel like to me in the in tier one, I feel like the hardest role for me to create this separation is in the support role.
Yeah.
The support role to me is like some of these supports do really well, but then there's also times where they don't do really well. So someone like um I know like Emeristic, she looks really really good on like these enchanters, but
Mhm.
then I saw a game where she was on Nautilus and it did look just really really like not as good.
Mhm.
Um and I feel like there's a few players that I feel like have like obviously Kakalin, he plays 1 week in the top lane. I automatically think he climbs very high.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's a few players on here. Like obviously we see like the players are like new to it. I think Wobble Wobble is actually way better than this, but Wobble Wobble's only played like 3 or 4 games this season,
Yeah.
so it's very hard to accurately evaluate that. But you can kind of see like the groupings of players. You can kind of see like obviously your entire team is one across the board. Then like you'll see like ABB has most of their players pretty high up there,
Yeah.
and you'll see a lot of the espionage guys up there as well.
Yeah, and this is of
So
course with the understanding that Empire's team isn't on here because it's not fair
yeah,
for, people. So this is for people at home. Empire's not on his list because he's part of Empire. So obviously we will all be a little bit more biased to players on our own teams. But yeah, I do find it interesting that you put my team's team as like first across the board. If I personally had to put my own team in a power rankings, I would put some of my players number one, but I think there are players that are better than some of our players. I'm not going to mention names because I'm probably one of them, but because I'm just very modest about my play. I'm not a very I'm not a very cocky player when it comes to, especially when I'm trying to power rank people. Like I love actually that you put. All right, Brady. So we have your tier two rankings here. Obviously, where this is not including Rose. Oh my God, I almost said Anguish. Uh, without Rose. So
It
give
also
me.
doesn't include anguish,
Yeah, it
but
doesn't include English either. So tell me your
that is
thoughts about it.
I think ADC was like what Stro said the hardest row because I think everyone's pretty close,
Yeah,
honestly. Especially like the top four. I think mid kind of has separated themselves in almost every role, but top lane.
yeah, I definitely would agree. I definitely think top lane feels like there's a high like 3 to 4 players on their list, and after that it feels pretty weak. But I
Yeah.
definitely think there's like a very definitive like top three in a lot of the roles, and then 80 carry to me feels like the hardest role to rank because like I feel like they're all interchangeable depending on meta, depending on champ that they're playing. So it definitely feels harder to rank the players. I mean, obviously you had the pleasure of playing against Rose, and now you're playing with Rose. So do you think that your team is just number one across the board on every position, or what are your thoughts about it?
I think we're at least top two in every position.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I will say one thing. I think 80's carry is also hard to rank because half the games they either do really well or they just flop
yeah,
and they do really poorly. Obviously, other than the min 80 carry.
yeah. I wish that was the same for me. My games should just end before I have impact, but
Yeah.
but
Um, like in like mid lane, I feel like the two to two to four 2 to 4 is like pretty close,
Mhm.
where like they're pretty consistent like throughout the games. Other than like maybe they'll have like a pop off game here or there, but they're at least like doing pretty well for the most part.
Yeah. So I'm actually pretty curious because we'll get to my standings here in a minute. But I had Mollywobs pretty low rated, and you have them pretty high rated. Is that just because of your own lane dynamic against them, or what was your
Uh,
thought with them
I
there?
think like I mostly just looked at the past 2 weeks. I thought they're doing pretty well, especially in the games they were winning.
Mhm.
I think in the game or two that they lost, it was against like Mint, and they everyone got crushed anyway. So it's kind of hard to like really say like you know or really judge those games. So I kind of like took like the very like smashing games on either side for everybody kind of out the window,
Mhm.
and kind of just judged on like the other games, most of that weren't against Mint or whatever.
All right, so here are my rankings. Obviously, I'm going to take you guys' input because I have both of you on this list. But this is where I personally have my rankings. Again, I'm a little bit more favored towards Empire when it comes to the top of the list for a lot of the roles, just because they are the team that we've played the most, and they are the team that I respect the most of all the teams because I haven't played against Apple Battle Boys at all the entire season, and not some of the other teams as well. So I will always rate the teams that I personally play pretty high. So going through it, I think me and you, Stro, both put Kakala at 3 in top lane. I feel like it's pretty right, just because he had a really big impact in his 1 week. He did play it, so I think that's pretty fair. And then I think the hardest position I had a hard time rating in tier 1 will probably be jungle and then support, because I think I agree with you when you said that supports, depending on the style of champ they're playing, especially for someone like a Maristic, she's really, really good at enchanters. But then, especially against us, against me personally, she didn't play enchanters. She decided to go with an engaged champ. Didn't look too comfortable on the champion. So I definitely think maybe prioritizing that comfort is going to be really important for these people. But for me, I think jungle was like the hardest role for me to grade, because so I know that Nakama just got to B team about a week and a half ago. So it's hard always for a jungler when you're joining a new team that you're going to be dealing with a lot of different things, because you have different lanes. You need to prioritize which lanes you're going to be playing for in every game. There's a lot of pressure in jungle and competitive setting. So I definitely think it's always one of the hardest, if not the hardest role to critique. So obviously I have Hot Asian Girl as number one. I think he's just been really dominant. Divine Precision, even though I personally haven't played against him, every game he looks like he's popping off. So that's why I gave him the 2 spot, even though I personally haven't played against him yet. And then I have Rav at 3. Do you see anything surprising with the list on the tier 1 side there, Stro?
Um, I would definitely say Husifer. I was pretty surprised you put him that low. And another one is Burger King. I think that's another pretty low one. But
Let me
other than
see.
that, I think it's pretty similar. I mean, I think I put Yuki a bit lower than you did, if I remember correctly. Um, Actually, no, I had him at 3 as well. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, yeah, I think Burger King is kind of a very important part of Warriors, and I feel like with the roster now kind of getting a little bit better around him, he's gonna look a lot better as well. And Cusifer, like, I think I had him around like middle of the pack.
Yeah, I will say it is harder for me to take opinions on someone like Burger King, because I think you had a pretty high. I think you actually had him at 3. But the problem that I had is that I have probably the best jungler in the entire league, and he does a really good job of negating junglers. So as far as for me personally, it feels a lot of junglers just don't have a lot of high impact against us so far. So that's why, as you can see, I mean, like I have the one jungler I respect the most, and then the jungler that I've been seeing smashing at 2, and then there's all pretty much most, if not all, of the masters top lane or junglers, and then the rest of the legends fall after, because I just feel like they are really struggling against Stro. The Stro, not Stro02, the Stro. Uh, but that's just my evaluation. And then I think for RPG, when I personally have played against him, I don't think it was the biggest impact. I think one game he played Jin, and then the other game he played Misfortune. And I felt like both times, if we just scaled and got to a point where we could team fight, he would be irrelevant, and that's kind of what happened. So, in my opinion, That's just where I had them. So that's kind of like my defense for them.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think I mean compared to my previous player rankings, I had Tension Fox a lot higher on the list for AD. I think there's just been a really big improvement by other players, which is why I probably moved him down a lot more than what he's probably used to. Because I mean, I literally had him as number one because the first 2 weeks he was going crazy. Where I feel like now he's just been more of a consistent damage threat, but not like the main reason they're winning. And then for Yuki, I think Yuki is like probably the most important player on Espionage in my opinion. I think he is very consistent every game, draws bans, plays well. Like obviously, I have a lot of love for Rat. We just had him on the podcast last week, but I definitely think Yuki is like that pivotal player on that team. If you're looking for someone to go off, it's probably gonna be him. So that's why I had him pretty high. Plus, I feel like we have the same issue that we had with tier two, where there's like the clumping of like 3 to 4
Yeah.
good players in every role, and then there's a kind of a drop off. And then we have the next tier, and that's kind of how I felt with most of the roles this time around for tier one. I think that's what I would do for. I think for support is also just it's an extremely difficult role because they play such a big variety of champs, which will always lead to how you look. Because some people play Mumu and you're going in and you're killing people or you're dying. So you're playing an enchanter, you're playing safe, but you're playing to support your AD carries doing a lot of work. So that's why I think you can shine or not shine depending on if you're on a good team or a bad team for support. That's just how I look at it. And then for tier two, I'm gonna bring Brady in here. Obviously, you see everything. Is there any surprises here for tier two?
Surprises. I Jansen Islanders is I think a rated or is to me rated really high, but I understand like 80 carries like kind of a weird lane
Yeah.
position to rank. Well, other than that, no, not really. I mean, maybe having the new Origin players, not that's kind of toxic, but not lane art last.
Yeah, I mean
But
it's always gonna be hard for the bottom when it comes to when there's only 6 teams, right? Because two of the teams, one has FF their games and the one has been banned from the league.
yeah,
So I feel like it's always gonna be harder when you only have 6 teams to go from. But I think Jan's been playing pretty well for their team. I think he's a pretty big carry for Deep Below. I think it's pretty much between him and Wormtongue. I mean, they have a pretty consistent team, but I think him and Wormtongue are the main carries. I think Wormtongue can be pretty inconsistent, where I think as Jans is pretty consistent every game. And then I still rated Enders really high at AD because I do think he is that sole carry for Hydra. That's why I rated him. Like when I do these play rankings, I do it off their play as well as I think what I would think, obviously from an outsider looking in, the importance of the player on their roster. So if we took this player off this roster, how would they look? How would their team look? And so that's why I always had rated you really highly because even though you were on Anguish and they weren't winning, I think you were just always doing the most for your team. And and then same thing, I could say the same thing for the top for pretty much every position, honestly. I think Kadrian does a lot for Moon, absorbs a lot of bans, plays really well, absorbs a lot of jungle pressure, and still plays very well. I think Peakley has just shown that he has been able to get the better of Fisher now twice, who I rated as the best, if not the second best jungler in tier two. Probably should be a tier one jungler next season. But I think Peakley's done pretty well into him twice now. So that's why I gave him the edge. I think the Mint KMZ and the Bradyhash combo is one to have. I think Brady I think is just more important to his team. Where I think KMZ has. I mean, it's kind of ironic because both players have really good junglers, but the consistency in the rest of the lanes isn't always there for both teams. And then I think Salt Spreader and Maxi Boo are like the clear one and two at support, and then there's a drop off. And that's how I think we've all talked about that, where there's like this clumping of 2 to 3 to maybe 4 in some lanes. Like to me, I think mid and AD are like the hardest to rank for this tier. Whereas I think the rest of the roles, it's pretty obvious who is the ones that helping their team wins and who are the ones that are causing some issues or not playing as consistent. So yeah, that's overall what I had. Any last thoughts there for my tier two straw?
something about your tier two. I mean, the only thing that I can really grasp is like there are some people that do look like low on these lists, but it's not. You know, it could be like you said due to like the team's performance. So, like I said, there's some people that are gonna get like overlooked a little bit, especially when, like you said, there's just these clumps, and when you're playing in these clumps, it's unfortunately they're gonna be grouped at the highest, regardless of like just like individual skill. I think. So,
All right. So we first of all, I want to thank Brady for taking the time out of your day to come and be part of the podcast. I really appreciate your insight on Tier 2 especially, because like me and Stro both said, we can't watch every game. We're playing, right? So it's hard for us to catch a lot of the games. I try and watch as much of the VODs as I can, but obviously having that player insight is really important to us. We didn't have one in Tier 2 last week, so thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was fun being here.
Yeah. So
Definitely like to do this in the future.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm going to go ahead and talk about some stuff as far as like LAS now as the admin slash owner of the league. The first thing I want to talk about is obviously we're gonna have tiebreaker. More than likely, we're gonna have tiebreakers in both divisions coming up. I want everyone to know so it's not a problem later. They are played the next day on Monday. This is not a we can reschedule it. Is in the rule book that they play the next day. Obviously that's something we're gonna look into as far as like maybe potentially changing some of the rules and stuff like that for the next season. But as it's written right now, the tiebreakers are the following day. So please have your teams ready to play them, especially if you're in one of those spots where you think you're gonna have a tiebreaker. Just try and be available. If not, then try and have your team set something up. Other thing is obviously playoffs coming up soon, and after once we start the playoffs, we'll start our sign up for season 7 of the LAS. It's gonna be a little bit different with how we're doing signups this year. I'm changing a lot of the things to make it a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient. And then obviously we talked about this last week. We're adding prize pool for Grand Tournament and for Grand Showdown. It's something to just basically say thank you to the teams that have been here this season. It was a rebuilding year. We had a lot of problems with staff and admin last year, trying to build off that foundation this year to move forward in a progressive manner for next season. So that's kind of like where and this is, again, we don't charge fees for anything. This is my money that I'm putting into the league to just thank the teams for showing up and for dealing with us during this transition year. Another thing that we changed is that Grand Showdown now, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, is a 6 team bracket. So it is going to be 6 teams. All 6 teams that are left are going to make it into that Grand Showdown, have a chance for the cash prize. That is going to be for the top 2 only. Last thing I want to talk about as far as like admin stuff is that we're going to be having staff openings as well as media openings following this week. So after season 6 regular season ends, which will be on Sunday, we are going to have staff openings available as well as media for casters or production. They will both be open. So for people who want to work for staff as the LAS, I think you can give some kind of insight. Please go ahead and do so. I greatly will appreciate anyone who wants to volunteer to do staff or wants to get into casting. I definitely think I personally cast a lot and I really enjoy it almost as much as I play the game. So it's definitely something I would like to have more people do. The last thing I will bring up is we did do a feedback for season 6. I think it's really important. If you guys have a concern, a problem, something you want to bring up, something you want to highlight of the season, that's what the feedback's for. It takes 5 minutes. Please fill it out. It helps me understand where you're coming from as a player to, understand what's in everyone's heads. We are doing a captain's meeting on Sunday after the games to go over feedback with my captains. But outside of that, that's it as far as admin stuff. So going into our question of the week for our fans, the question is, which I want your input on this because I'm curious. Do you think that tier 2 teams can compete with tier 1 teams? And if you think so, what is the range of the tier 2 teams that can beat the tier 1? Obviously, we moved away from the grand tournament where we have included grand tier 2 teams in with the grand tier 1 teams because we wanted to be a little bit more fair, more enjoyable for everyone. So Brady, you tell me, do you think the tier 2 teams can clash with some of these tier 1 teams?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think what was it, like 2 3 weeks ago we had our MNG
Yeah,
Civil War
in-house.
stuff.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
in-house.
And I think when I was on Anchorage, I mean, I feel like we showed that we could compete at least with B team or what
Yeah,
B team was at the time.
yeah, I definitely would agree.
Um,
Yeah, so
and Moon also took a game off of B team. I think as far as with Anguish, I mean, we had leads of over 2 or 3K in all 3 games
yeah, so I'm
with
curious,
like different like lanes getting ahead and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I
so
think
do
we
you,
showed like a little bit more work.
yeah, so do you think that the top tier 2 teams can like beat the bottom tier 1 teams? Do you think they can contest with just everyone in tier 1?
I wouldn't say everyone, definitely not the top like tier 1 teams with like diamond players
Hmm.
or like like definitely I think we could show like at least our potential is like probably middle of the pack in tier 1 possibly.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you for that comment section. Let me know what you think. If you guys think that tier 2 can compete with tier 1. Sure, what are your thoughts? Do you think they can?
I mean, I think kind of what they did last season with the how they had the tier two teams battle for the grand tournament.
Yeah, for the play-in.
The play in, I think it was good. I think that instead of it being like the gauntlet for just like tier one, it
Hmm.
should be like the top, I don't know, 1 or 2 teams from tier two should go through that gauntlet just
Hmm.
to prove that they deserve to be there.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like the top two, top three teams, especially this season in tier two, I think could give a good run for, the bottom clumps of the tier one divisions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it's definitely something we're gonna experiment with and look into as far as going into next season. So that's again why I say, guys, fill out the feedback so I can get general feedback as to what you guys would like to see because we're in a year of transition and I want to make things interesting for everyone and not just make it so you guys are up here and you guys are down here and that's how it's going to be. So I definitely want to have some kind of inclusion and all that. So, but yeah, thank you guys so much again for watching this episode, episode 2 of season 4 of the podcast. Brady, thank you again for being our guest. And obviously, Stroud, thank you for hosting with me. And yeah, we'll see you guys on the next one.
See you guys.
Bye.